My name's Lisa Uyeda. I'm the collections manager at the Nika National Museum and co-chair of the Archives Cluster. I'm involved with the Landscapes of Injustice project since the second year of the project, which was about 6 years ago now. So it's been quite some time, and it's so great to see the launch of this amazing database finally happening today. I'd like to acknowledge and thank the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples for whose land I have the ability to live, work, and play on. And I'd like to encourage you all to use the chat function to acknowledge the lands of where you are, and join me in saying thanks for being an uninvited guest on these beautiful lands. Great. So we've got quite a few folks here, looking good. I'd like to just reiterate again that we will have a Q&A session towards the end. At that time, you can send in your questions by chat. You can also send in your questions by chat throughout the event, and we'll be compiling those questions for the end. This event is being recorded. Only the presenters will appear in the recording. There's a closed captioning at the bottom there. And we'll ask that you stay on mute and your video turned off to help those with bandwidth issues. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome and introduce Jordan Stanger-Ross, who's an associate professor of history at the University of Victoria and our project director for the Landscapes of Injustice project. Jordan.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. This is the last couple of events now after a long project together, working together since 2013. So you'll have to forgive that my remarks are mostly thanks, because I'm feeling very thankful after all this work we've done together. And this material that we're launching today was not actually anticipated when the Landscapes of Injustice project started in 2012, 2013, as we began these discussions. We thought we had to focus on 4 sites of study. And it was actually a conversation with 2 historians in Victoria, who some of you will know, Anne Lee and Gordon Switzer, who came and sort of said, how could Victoria not be included in the sites that you're studying? And it was a real regret of mine not to include Victoria. It would have been a site that I would have loved to include as an area of focus. But we said to them at the time that we hope to work with Library and Archives Canada to digitize the records of almost every Japanese Canadian family that was dispossessed during the 1940s, and to be able to make that full record available. And they really urged us to do so. And that helped to push us to work with Library and Archives Canada, which also deserves thanks for digitizing. They had digitized at that point about 10% of the records of Japanese Canadians that they had, of these dispossession records. And they agreed to work with us to digitize the other 90% of those records. And those are the largest number of the records that we are able to launch today in this digital archive, which are case files for individual Japanese Canadian families. And we hope that after this session and in the months and years to come, that many families will access these rich resources of family history, as well as resources of injustice, of course. But it's a privilege to be able to work with a national archives that's willing to dig in and do the hard work of digitizing all of those materials for this kind of work. There were research assistants, Caitlin Finley, notable among them, and many others who were working in the records of the Library and Archives Canada in Ottawa at the time, and recognized the richness of these records. They include letters written by Japanese Canadians, hearings of Japanese Canadians testifying to the injustice, and our research assistants recognized right away how powerful these resources were, and that they should be shared. Gord Lyle was a research assistant in the Digital Archives Cluster, which Lisa and Stuart Arneal oversaw. And the research assistants, along with Gord and many others, worked for years to separate these case files so that we can now make them searchable and readily available to people on the basis of a name search. So thank you so much to all of those students. And the Nikkei National Museum, of course, Lisa, Linda, Sherry, especially, who's worked with us for years, recognizing the value of these records to the community, curating a museum exhibition that really focused on the case files and the records of Japanese Canadian families and Japanese Canadian experiences. And I'm just so grateful for the museum that helped to motivate this project from the start. And then I want to ask this individual to unmute his video and audio to just embarrass and flatter him a little bit. Mike Eby, who often stays in the background. Mike, will you unmute so that you come up to the top?
No, I can't. I'm technically challenged. I can't.
Mike, we need to see you live. Mike didn't, this isn't canned. Mike didn't know I was gonna.
I can't. Actually, I can't.
Oh, because you're sharing this screen. Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, we can see your smiling face in your profile photo, and presumably you've popped to the top of everyone's screen. So Mike really saw the tremendous value of these case files for the community from the outset. And he's organized and really been the motivator behind sharing these already with the families we've been able to share them with, running sessions like this to make that available. And it's really his vision of what these case files could offer to the community over the long term. And I think for Mike, this is one of the, is really the key output of the whole project. So I'm delighted to see almost 130 people here, and to really just thank Mike for everything he's done for this project in every respect, but especially in ensuring that these the value of these case files was understood and widely shared. Thank you so much, Mike, and I hope you're happy with how these are making their way out into the community. And thanks, Lisa. We can get on with the main show now.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. And of course, I echo thanks to everyone Jordan listed, and all the hardworking RAs, and of course, my co-chair, Stuart Arneal. You know, it really took a whole crew to make all of these deliverables happen. So it's great. And without further ado, I'll introduce Joey, who's been instrumental in working with us on the archives cluster as well. So Joey Takeda is a fourth generation Yonsei Japanese Canadian who has worked with the Digital Archives Cluster since 2018 to create the infrastructure and processing for the archival website. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Honors in English Literature and Gender Studies from the University of Victoria, and is in the final stage of his Master's in English Literature and Language from the University of British Columbia. And doing all of this while working with us, of course, on the Digital Archives Cluster. No easy feat, I'm sure. So he's focusing on modern and contemporary Asian Canadian literature and the digital humanities. He's also the user interface developer for the Digital Humanities Innovation Lab at Simon Fraser University, and in collaboration with the Endings Project at UVic, has worked with the Martin Holmes on developing Static Search, the serverless and archivable search engine that powers the search and advanced search functionality in the LOI Digital Archive website. And before we take it away here with Joey, I think we have a drum roll coming up. I believe that's right there, Jordan. We wanted to do a little drum roll for launching you could just all imagine some drums banging in the background here for launching our new database. And there we go. Take it away, Joey. Yay.
Great, thank you, hooray. I'm just going to share my screen. Let me just find it.
And we've shared the URL in the chat box there if people want to access it.
Great. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Lisa, for the introduction. And I echo all the thanks working with all of the research assistants and many of the individuals. as part of the LOI Collective. It's been really great. So I wanted to talk here a little bit before digging into how the archive works about my own sort of experience of working with the archive. And part of the challenge with an archive of this size is making sense of the enormity of the collection. It's a weighty collection, both psychically and technically, composed of thousands of histories and lives and stories. And so when I began to work on the project in 2018, I was overwhelmed by the various types of data. How do we make all these various methodologies and all of these different types of archival files and the different kinds of questions they ask of this complex and tangled history of dispossession talk to one another? How do we make them mutually intelligible? How do we not only see the forest from the trees and the trees from the forest, but also that interconnected rhizomatic network that undergirds the vast archive? And beyond that, it's a lot of data. Nearly 100,000 individual records, comprising over 3 million words across the entire collection. But when I started working on the project, I was thinking less about the individual records and more about the composite whole. But what ended up happening was that I was inevitably hailed by my own family history, which I had known little of beforehand. I remember looking through the data, just trying to get a handle on all of the different types of the collections. And I opened the first protest letter in the collection of protest letters. The first protest letter I discovered and there, when in opening this first protest letter, I find that my great-grandfather's name, my own last name, staring back at me. And each of these collection of materials, as I continued to work through them, brought about new personal and familial discoveries, many of which are then shared with my family. So my great-grandfather's quite extensive bird commission file, in which the commissioner chides him for too carefully trying to appraise his belongings. And many of my great-grandparents' my butchons and my grandfather's custodian case files. And my grandfather's was difficult to find because I didn't know that his birth name was actually Joji and not George. And Joji eerily echoes my own name. So the digital archive is structured in order to help make sense of these histories as well, to facilitate this sort of family story. And the archive itself is built on a strong foundation of digital archival principles, including the multiple search engines, which I'll talk about in a moment, which means that this work and these histories are built with archivability and sustainability in mind, that they won't be subject to the sort of problem of digital decay or ephemerality that so often accompany these websites. We built this so that it will be archivable. To talk about the LOI website, it's mostly structured as collections. Each collection contains a particular genre or type of document, often, but not always, deriving from a single archival holding, like the Libraries and Archives Canada or Nikkei National Museum. For instance, as I was showing earlier, clicking on the protest letters brings you to an about page, which explains the history of this collection and the methodology. And from there, you can choose whether to browse or to search. So browsing brings you up the full list of all the protest letters we have in the collection, fully transcribed. And there you see the accompanying facsimile. Clicking on that will let you download that facsimile and view it in your browser. Clicking on any name in the collection, for instance, to go back to the first protest letter, clicking on any name in the collection will bring up a pop-up box, which gives some information about that person. The project has taken a fairly strong stance on not combining people of the same name because we can't tell whether or not they are in fact the same person. So in clicking on these boxes, it gives you some of the data about that person, what we know about them, the documents in which that person is referenced, and then all of the other people in the collection who share that surname. This is helpful not only to establish family connections, but also because it allows you to look through the various instances of a particular name and see all the different records. So for instance, my great-grandfather, Fusajiro Takeda, you can click and find all of the various instances and instances in which he is named. And these names are all browsable in the data section as well. You can look at all of the names, 27,000 of them. But the easiest way to do that is through the search, through either either from the front page of the landing page when you first go to the website, or by clicking the search button. Doing a search for a name will show a number of results, usually quite a few, across all the collections. The searches show the name of the document, the collection in which it is found, and where in the document that text can be found. And note that looking for an individual name involves, it only looks for each individual part. So looking for Fusajiro Takeda, for instance, finds all instances of Fusajiro or Takeda. Appending a plus sign to it will allow you to look for instances where it's just Fusajiro and Takeda. So it must contain both of those phrases. And all of these instructions for searching are on the how to search page, which is linked from every search. That searches through, when you search through everything, that searches through the entire collection, but each individual collection has a set of advanced features on the left side. So for instance, clicking the custodian case files allows you to search just within the case files. So you're searching through just this subset. Putting something in quotation marks will show you just the things that have that exact phrase. And doing a search for Fusajiro Takeda will bring up all of the case files which mention Fusajiro Takeda. This includes his wife and his children. With the advanced search features, you can also do just document searches. So this is the beginning of sorting, of being able to do a bit of analysis, or if you're interested in the social networks that may arise through these custodian case files. For instance, if you put in, looking at Fusajiro Takeda again, looking up his date of birth, you can see it's April 24th, 1891. We could look just for April 21st. All of the instances, for instance, of other people born just on April 21st, which there are none others. But we can also do things like looking up various other exact phrases. For instance, if you're wanting to look for all of the people who are from Coughlin, BC, which is where my grandfather was originally, before he was dispossessed, you can see all of the other people who are in Coughlin, BC from the case files. This is, again, very helpful because now we can start to think about the social networks or the emergent sort of groups that may have been either before or after displacement. And so all of these records are now available at the URL loi.uvic.ca/archive. And if there are any technical issues, those can all be placed through the contact link. There you can see the information about how to contact us. And we encourage any sort of feedback, or if there are any bugs or errors that you notice on the site, please do let us know. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joey. We did have a question come in just asking, is there a way to correct the information presented in the database? So of course, any of the metadata, so the text that we typed to put into the database, you can contact us through that contact page that Joey just shared with us. If there's any incorrect information in the actual photocopies of the materials, unfortunately, that's something that we cannot change. But if there's there's any way that we can help improve the descriptive text that we've put together, then by all means, send us some information. I know it's very, very common to see spelling mistakes in names, and also people who have gone by different names. And through the process of looking at my own family records, I saw lots of different typos and iterations of my ancestors' names. So certainly send us a note, and we'll do our best to make sure that we're editing those descriptions so the database can function as smoothly as possible. So thank you so much, Joey, for the overview of the database. There's the URL again, loi.uvic.ca/archive. And it really is just a treasure trove of information. And I cannot express how wonderful this will be for those of us in the community who want to start doing their family research, or perhaps have already spent years doing family research. I guarantee there will be something new that you will learn from this database. Of course, keep in mind, it does have a lot of government created records. So there will be different challenges with reading through the records. So certainly take your time, contact us if you have any questions at all. And I'll make a mention at the end of this session of our follow-up sessions where we can actually get together again and discuss these. So there's a great question. I'll just jump in before we announce our next speaker. Do you need permission to enter the database? Are there privacy issues to be concerned about? So we do not have a login portal. This is available online. The information that has been shared on this database have been cleared by the archival repositories of which copies have come from. If the records that the LOI project created themselves, such as the oral histories that the project went and captured during our research years, those have all been cleared for permissions. So everything we've gone through, we've done our best to be due diligent about access to information and privacy concerns. You may also see in the database that there will be descriptions for materials, but perhaps not the actual PDF copies that you can download and read directly. And so in those situations, we had decided that it was important for people to know that those records exist, but that it was perhaps a little bit too sensitive or not within the scope of our project to actually share the digitized materials. So in those instances, we encourage you to contact the original archives, the original repository where those archives are preserved, and request access in that manner. So we did, it was, lots of conversations we had about access and privacy and what's appropriate and not appropriate, knowing that this is the World Wide Web. And I think we did our best to make sure we're addressing all of those concerns. That's a great question. Thank you. Wonderful. So we were lucky to be able to pull some case files for a few select people on our project and let them sort of explore through their family records first. And so we've asked them here today to give us some background on what that experience was like, what they learned, and just share a bit of that information. So first up is Eiko Eby, a Nikkei Yonsei and currently the president of the Central Vancouver Island Japanese Canadian Cultural Society in Nanaimo. Eiko is a professor in the Faculty of Education in the Kinesiology Department at Vancouver Island University. In 2018, Eiko was awarded the Vancouver Island University's first President's Award for Outstanding Community Engagement for her work in the Japanese Canadian community. She has a strong passion for this history as both her parents were displaced and dispossessed of their belongings during the internment of Japanese Canadians in British Columbia. So I'll now ask Eiko to join us and to unmute and share her presentation.
Thank you, Lisa. You guys can hear me, Lisa?
Yes, thank you.
So Mike, you can go to the next slide. So both my parents, as Lisa said, were interned, and my father's side is the Tabata side, and they were from Steveston, and they didn't own property, so I'm not really going to talk about that side of the family. They are linked to the Atagi family, which has quite a case file. So that family did go to lots of locations, including Caslow, Greenwood, and Midway. But I'm going to talk about my mother's side, and that's the Takasaki family. So my grandmother, Sakie, was born in Haney, which is Maple Ridge. So she was born in Canada, which is why I'm a Yonsei. And my grandfather was Rikimatsu. So there were 7 children that you see pictured there. My grandparents were actually cousins, so they're both Takasakis. And so my mother is in the picture on the left. She was the 3rd child. And that's actually a picture on their farm in Haney. And my mother always carried this picture around. And she said it was one of the happiest days of her childhood, because after the summer crops, they took her and bought her this jacket and this purse, and it was a big deal. So after the dispossession, they were mainly in New Denver, and the cabin number 6 in the Nikkei Internment Memorial Center in New Denver is actually the Takasaki cabin that they lived in New Denver. So what I had known previously was not a lot. I remember that I came home from school one day and was telling my family about what I had learned in my history class about this internment of Japanese Canadians. My parents had never talked about it. And that's when I found out that my own families were interned and dispossessed. So that was a bit of a shock, but my parents didn't talk about it. So I knew they had 2 farms in Haney, and I knew they got some money back after the war, but that was the extent of it. And so when I started going through this archival data, I remember the emotion that came to me was, at first I was angry. And reading through some of the transcripts and the correspondence and the farm appraisals. So Mike's just gone to the appraisals here. And I highlighted in yellow some of the things that were on there. You can see on the left, they are appraising my grandparents' 2 pieces of property in Haney. And they're saying it's scarcely inhabitable, that the dwellings were makeshift, that things were dilapidated, the buildings were dilapidated. On the right, you could see it says the farm is in poor condition and tillage. Again, the buildings are dilapidated. Mike, can you go to the next slide? And no, not that one, the one before. So the second piece of property, they're saying it's just a hole in the bush. And I remember being really upset reading that when they go to the Bird Commission. My grandfather is trying to tell them, of course it's inhabitable. That is where they lived. And then on this real property summary, it's saying that their property is sold by special arrangement. So that actually upset me, because I don't know what kind of special arrangement they thought it was. But just overall disbelief, I guess, was the emotion. There's some incidences and correspondence regarding the neighbors who had the key, and then they were safeguarding their stuff, and the inventories of their stuff kept being reduced. And there was a point where the neighbor did admit his responsibility for taking some of the chattels and the properties from that land and from their buildings. So the things that I learned from the database is, I knew they had 2 pieces of property, but the size of the properties, 14 and 15 acres, are fairly significant size. The properties were in my grandmother's name, which I found surprising. I wasn't sure. I tried to ask my cousins. All of my mother and her siblings have all passed away. So I tried to ask my cousins, does anyone know why the properties were in my grandmother's name? Our best guess is that maybe because she was born in Canada. But we don't know, because even at the Bird Commission, my grandfather spoke, not my grandmother. So he was called as a witness because he wasn't the property owner. So just learning about the sale of the property being sold through the Soldiers Settlement Board, and being actually quite disgusted at the low appraisal and stuff disappearing. Can you go to the next slide, Mike? And this next piece of correspondence on the left, where they're telling my grandmother, so they've sold the property now, and then they're telling her that $65 per month basically is going to be applied for their maintenance fee to stay in the internment camp, and basically they're going to run that amount down. So that was, I didn't know that they were paying for their own stay at the internment camp from the money that was received for selling the property. So when I became in the landscape, involved in the landscapes project, I learned that, but to actually read it in the files, you know, even though I knew it through this project, it was, it's still quite a shock to read it. There were some other things with having shares in the Maple Ridge Cooperative Produce Exchange, that there were records in that office to show who owned shares. My grandparents owned 200 shares, but they only were able to sell the ones that they had certificates for in their possession while they were in internment. So they ended up getting, I think it was 133 out of 200 of those shares being sold. So the document on the right is showing the Bird Commission summary. And basically the value of the two properties and their truck was worth over $7,500. The custodian paid out about $1,600. So they claimed at the Bird Commission well over $5,000 and were able to retrieve, you could see the number on the bottom right, $2,289.05, which is not a lot, but I understand that that's not a bad amount. So overall, it was just fantastic being able to have access to these documents. It filled in a lot of gaps and things that I wasn't told through my mother, and she was a young child at the time, so I'm not even sure she knew the details and all these correspondence that involved her parents. And but what I would say to people, it is a real emotional journey, and so when you go into these documents, there's going to be a whole range of emotions that can be quite difficult to navigate on its own. So that's my story of the Takasaki family, and thank you to Landscapes for having the digital archives and for us to be able to get access to this. It's great.
Thank you so much, Eiko. Yeah, so it's a eye-opening experience to go through your own family case file, and so I encourage those who do, you know, reach out in the community. We will have sessions later on that I'll explain at the end of this presentation, where you can connect with others and chat and you know, share what you learned. It really helps to talk about it because there's so much information that's not contained within these case files that need to be contextualized, and it can be quite the emotional journey to go through and read these records, especially for those acknowledging that we still have many survivors who lived through these experiences and whose names and information show up in the records. So our next presenter is Sally. Sally Ito is a sensei. She is a writer who has published 3 books of poetry, a collection of short fiction, and most lately a memoir about her Japanese-Canadian family called The Emperor's Orphans. She lives in Winnipeg, and I'd like to ask Sally, oh, unmute and video, there you go. Take it away, Sally.
Hi, everybody. So glad that you're all here. My name's Sally Ito. There's the cover of the book Mike is showing here. And I'm going to tell you what happened with me in my situation with the case files. So the time the information was being released, I was near the end of editing the book, The Emperor's Orphans, which you see here. And in my book, I used 2 narrators coming from different perspectives in my family. And one of those narrators was my Nisei great-aunt Kay, born in Acme Cannery in 1914. All I knew of my Aunt Kay's life is what she told me in bits and pieces as a child. I knew she was interned with her first husband, Charlie Imahashi, in Popoff. And she told me how my dad and his brothers would visit her and Charlie from where my dad's family was interned in Lemon Creek. Auntie Kay told me stories and anecdotes, but I didn't really find out what happened to her and her first husband, Charlie Imahashi's property until I accessed the archive documents. And this is what I discovered. My great aunt and uncle owned farmland in New Westminster, BC, not far from the rest of the extended Ito family who were strawberry farmers. When war broke out, Charlie was sent to road camp and Auntie Kay stayed with my grandmother and her 5 boys until they were forcibly moved to Hastings Park. When the custodian started creating property files for the displaced, I discovered, along with the custodian, that my aunt and uncle's property deed was still under the name of Charlie's brother, Kokichi, who had returned to Japan before the war. The property had been paid off already in 1933, but neither my aunt nor uncle had any documentation to prove it. There was some correspondence about the situation, during which time I discovered in one letter from the custodian that my aunt had not responded because she was sick with the mumps in hospital while at Hastings Park. This was news to me, and I was kind of like shocked that she was ill and was, having to, deal with the illness on top of all of this other stuff that was going on. So eventually, my aunt and uncle were reunited in Popoff, during which time they received notice of the sale of their property. But as far as the custodian was concerned, the money from the sale could not go to my aunt and uncle because it ostensibly, the land, belonged to Kokichi, Charlie's brother. So finally, my aunt was made to write a letter to the custodian and provide evidence that the property had been paid off already and that they had already paid the interest on it as well. And so the interest should not have been held back by the custodian on it. And here's the letter. So when I saw this letter, I immediately recognized the handwriting and voice of my Auntie Kay and could practically hear her saying those words. And the second letter she sent to the custodian really hit me hard. Yeah, you can see, Mike is just showing it there. It was brief and to the point, and I'm just going to read it to you. Dear sir, please kindly send all the money which you sold my property. And also please let me the list of the price for land too. I need very badly, so please kindly send me soon as you can. That letter just made me, even now it makes me think of her and break into tears, So by the time, interesting enough, I mean, this is even adds more to the emotion. By the time this whole process of trying to prove that this land had been paid for and was theirs was resolved with the custodian, Charlie had died and the money had to go through another process, which was the probate of the will, and before it could be given to my aunt. So it was finally given to her in November 27th, 1948. So the interesting thing was I did not know at all that my aunt received any money for the loss of their property. So that was news to me. But what really bothered me was the way in which my great aunt suffered the bureaucratic antipathy of the custodian's office. As evidenced by the landscapes historians and law professors, the dispossession was a betrayal of trust. My aunt and uncle were forcibly moved off their property in BC, told their property would be kept in trust during the war, but it was then sold without their consent. And then the onus of proof was on them to show that the land did indeed belong to them for them to get the money from the sale. Although you could say in one breath that the bureaucracy was scrupulously detailed and acted as fairly as possible in its work, in the other breath, you'd have to admit the overall action of dispossession was grossly unjust and its management heartless. So when you go into the details of your family's files, you will feel that heartlessness all the more keenly because you will know these names as people you loved. Thank you. That was my journey through the archives.
Thank you so much, Sally. And our last presenter today is Keiko Mary Kitagawa, who was born on Salt Spring Island, BC. Her family was exiled in April of 1942 after their father was taken away by the RCMP in March of 1942. They were incarcerated in Hastings Park, Greenwood, McGrath, Alberta, and after their father was released from the Yellowhead Pass work camp in August of 1942, Popoff, Bay Farm, Slocan, living in a tent, Roseberry, New Denver, and back to McGrath in 1946, after the ultimatum was issued by the federal government. After 5 years of running a restaurant in Cardston, Alberta, from 1949 to 54, the family moved back to Salt Spring Island, and they were the only Japanese Canadian family to return to a very racist community. She helped to clear 5.5 acres of scrubland into a family farm. Mary graduated from Trinity College at the University of Toronto in 1959 and taught at Kitsilano Secondary School. She's married to Tosh Kitagawa. They have 2 children and moved to Tsawwassen 46 years ago. After their children became of school age, she became a substitute teacher in the Delta School District. I'll also add to her bio that Mary is a mentor and activist, and I'm so excited to hear from her today. So Mary, if you can unmute and turn on your video, we'll get started with your story.
Okay, so I have
Video, start video.
there. Okay. Oh, hi, everyone. I am so pleased to be able to tell the story of what my family went through during the incarceration. Actually, I'm going to tell you about my grandparents' situation instead of my family. Although I like to tell you a little bit about my family. My mother was born in Steveston. Apparently, she was the first Japanese Canadian baby born in Steveston. And my father was born in Hiroshima, Japan. He came from a very noble family, a very wealthy family. And his father never had to work a day in his life. That's how wealthy they were. And he came to Canada in 1926 after he married my mother. And then he was a sponsored immigrant. He was sponsored by my mother's parents. And there he had to work for his in-laws for just 3 years, but he chose to work for them for 5 years. And after that, he and my mother bought 17 acres across the road on Sharp Road from my grandparents. My grandparents by that time had actually they stopped fishing because their fishing license was taken away. So in 1920, they moved on land to Salt Spring Island and bought 200 acres of prime land. They had virgin timber and lush valley where they farmed, and a bit of seafront. There they were very successful. Actually, they had to sell 5 of their fishing boats in order to buy this tract of land. And on this land was a house already. And later in about 1930 to, I think it was 35, between 35 and 37, they renovated the house and made it much larger. And since they sponsored at least 2 Japanese immigrant men to work on their farm at all times, they also built a smaller home right beside the bigger home for them to live in. And my grandparents, well, they ate with the family, but they lived in separate buildings. Yes, well, this one, I want to tell you a little bit about my grandparents. My grandfather Okano, Kumanosuke Okano, came to Canada in 1896, so that's 125 years ago. And they went in, well, actually, my grandfather worked in the forest at the beginning. And then when my grandmother came as a picture bride, they turned to fishing. And their central was Steveston. And later on, they moved to Vancouver Island and started fishing over there. And their fishing was so successful, they ended up with 5 large fishing boats. And that sound is not mine. And then when the fishing license was taken away, they came on land. And at the beginning, you will see that my grandparents had large greenhouses. There were 5 main greenhouses, and one's a half size right next to the house where they they grew these tiny seedlings, which was transplanted into the bigger greenhouses. They were very, very successful farmers. They the tomatoes that they grew in the greenhouses was easily sold to people to wholesale houses in Vancouver and Victoria. The ships came in to Ganges Harbor, the one that took the tomatoes to Vancouver, and the other one was at Fulford Harbor, which took the tomatoes to Victoria. Now, the 600 acres, there were 3 pieces of land altogether. And there was 100-acre piece of forest, which was really quite valuable. My grandparents found out from a logger that the trees on that virgin land was worth a lot of money. And however, when it was the estimate that came back when it was being sold really stunned me, because my grandparents were only given $200, and the custodian of enemy property, Gavin Mowat, sold it to a logger who flipped it right away and sold it for $2,000, whereas my grandparents only got $200. Now, you know that the estimates that were given by the custodian, the VLA, and the were really lowballed. It was really not the value of the property as we knew it. And this document shows that it was just a minute now. They said that the land was worth $5,750. That's 200 acres. And the other buildings, which included the house and the greenhouses, the chicken houses, and all the other buildings that were on the property. They said it was worth $13,055, and that total would have been $18,805. And they sold it for $2,470. So there was a loss of $16,335. But there were other things on the list. They only listed 3 greenhouses, and each greenhouse had a different value. And I don't see how that could have been, because all the greenhouses were of the same size. And therefore, that was another injustice there in the figures. And there was another, let's see now. Oh, and there was, my grandparents were asked to, my grandfather was asked to list how many, all the materials that were used to do the reno and to build the other buildings. Well, my grandfather was about 68 years old when he was uprooted. And then by the time he was asked by the Bird Commission to list all the materials for the renovation and the other buildings, he was in his 70s. Now, I don't see how he could remember everything. Like how can you remember how many pieces of lumber that went into one side of the building, or how many nails that were used, or how many shakes that were used to put on the renovation, or the part that was added on. And so this list, I don't know how my uncle and my 2 uncles and my grandfather were able to remember those figures. When I looked at it, I just couldn't believe how they could have come to those figures. And they could have put the prices of what they paid for. It was probably a guess, because I don't know how they could remember all those figures. And so and then on another document, it says that the land where my grandparents were farming was of poor quality. It said it was clay and sand, and yet my grandparents were producing wonderful berries and asparagus and cane berries and vegetables, and they had absolutely no problem producing those the crop. And so by saying that, they devalued the actual value of that land. And so the reason I know a lot about what happened to my family, my grandparents' family, is because we were one of the families that never remained silent. My parents were always talking about the incarceration, and all the things that they went through. And my parents were the kind that if they saw any injustice, they never remained quiet. They were never a bystander. They always voiced their discontent with whatever injustice. And during their incarceration, they never lost their dignity. or their pride in who they were. And that's another thing they taught me and my sibling, was to always be proud of who you are and never let others define you. And I don't know what else I could tell you. I could go on forever telling you about our family. However, I would like to say a little bit about the custodian of enemy property. My parents knew him since he was a lad. And when he took over as a custodian of enemy property, he became an opportunist. And I know for sure that he had a lot to do with how the appraisal was done on all the properties on Salt Spring Island. There were 11 families with property, which totaled over 1,000 acres. And there were 77 people. They were all, except for six men, all the children were born in Canada, including my mother. And the others were either, like my grandparents, were all naturalized, which was a necessary thing to have if you were a fisher. And Gavin Mowat ended up owning the largest piece of land on Salt Spring Island. It was the 600-acre estate of Torazo Iwasaki. And how he got it done, according to what I read, is he, as the custodian, transferred the Iwasaki property to the Minister of State. And the Minister of State transferred that land directly into the real estate company that Gavin Mowat owned. And I have a feeling that he also had part of my grandfather's property, because when we got back after 12 years of exile, back to Salt Spring Island in 1954, my mother went down to visit the people who were living there, and they happened to be a relative of Gavin Mowat. And Gavin apparently sold the 49 acres that was attached to the house for $50,000. And I think my grandparents got less than $6,000 for the whole 200 acres. So that's the kind of person that we were dealing with. And maybe I shouldn't tell you, well, I would tell you this. I guess he must have had a conscience when he was dying, because when he was in the hospital, he sent, oh, all right, Mike, I won't tell that story. All right, I'll just say thank you for listening.
Hi, Mary. Thank you so much for sharing that. So as we move towards the question and answer period, please send your questions in the chat to everyone or directly to Michael or Jordan. We've got a few here. I'll read through these ones first. And I'll actually ask Joey if he can share his screen again so we can all see the database and help navigate through that. And after these few questions here, if anyone would like to ask a question by unmuting or turning on their video, we can in just a few moments. So get your questions ready. So one question that came through was, is the archives closed, or can submissions and materials still be made? Thank you for the question. Of course, with the project, the funding had to end at some point. You know, we had to wrap up at some point. But myself here at the Nikkei National Museum and Cultural Center, we always encourage donations. So you're welcome to reach out to me at collections@nikkeiplace.org, and I'll put that into the chat there in just a moment. And talk to me about what you have. I do recognize that so many families still have materials related to this time period. And a big part of our challenge with this database was most of the records were coming from the government. So either the National Archives, Library and Archives Canada based in Ottawa, even the BC Archives out there in Victoria. So we really wanted to balance that with records that come from the community itself. And so that's where we see some wonderful oral histories being captured by the project. And also over 70 different collections from the Nikkei National Museum have also been included. And I must say that's just a small percentage of all the collections we actually have at the Nikkei National Museum, which total well over 1,000 online, and more, of course, that we're working on processing. So feel free to reach out. We're not actively adding anything, to answer your question, to the database. There will be some more attachments going up for the records that are already described there in the coming weeks and months. And in terms of adding new collections, you know, perhaps that's a conversation for Jordan and I to have for an LOI 2.0 initiative. But feel free to reach out me at the Nikkei National Museum, and we can talk more about that. So that's great. Just gonna scroll through here. Please send more questions in the chat. Let me just see what the next one is. Keep going.
I think the next question, Lisa, is on citation. We had a really lovely remark by Jennifer in regards to the emotional power of the records, and thanking the speakers for speaking to that. And Sandy also sends thanks. And then Leanne has a question about the automatic generation of citations.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. Wow, powerful. Yes, so Leanne's question is, I have a citation related question. I like to use citation software and find that when looking at a big picture type story, there can be a lot of citations. Are there any plans to enable an RIS or similar type ability to digitally create citations enabled on the website? I think I'll pass that one to Joey. And if Joey is able to help answer that question. For us, we do have in the about page a note on how to cite where we give some examples, but the auto generation, I'll ask Joey.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. We have plans for creating citations. As anybody who's cited an archive before knows, it's complicated to cite these things. So I think in the next phase of the project, one of the sort of auto-generated, these sort of auto-generated citations will need to sort of be sort of part of that work. Yeah, they're complicated to do automatically, but that's something that we're hoping to do. We just want to make sure that we're not giving bad citations. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to properly and give the proper citations for everything. But as Lisa said, there is right now a page on instructions on how to cite, but automatic ones are something that we're definitely looking towards as well.
That's great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I see some thanks coming in. Did anyone want to ask the panelists any questions, or wanted to come on and unmute to ask a question instead of chatting in case the chat feature is not available to you? Okay, I have a question. If Joey, could you show the terminology section on the website? I think this is so important when looking at these records that come from, the government, that were created and produced during that horrific time period. And you'll see a lot of inappropriate terms. We have contributed lots of newspaper clipping headlines as well from the Nika National Museum collections, where some of our Iseis and older Niseis have gathered clippings as the events were happening during their forced exile. And you'll see, terminology that will just send a shiver right down your spine. So we have a guide here for anyone who will be writing about this, who'll be sharing this with their families, perhaps for students who are going to be writing papers, and academics and researchers. So please do take a look through our terminology. Of course, it's not totally comprehensive of everything, but these are the ones that we would like to have you folks consider and to start think about, so we can change the narrative and take back that power of being called an enemy alien or being repatriated to Japan. So take a look at this and certainly help in sharing this information.
Lisa, Ellen has her hand raised, and I think it has to do with the linking error. So, Ellen, do you want to unmute?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, hi, everyone. Oh, my goodness, so much incredible work. Thank you so much. I actually find it really moving and very grateful for all the work that I know each of you have done and all the others over the years. So, yeah, my question is, I did look for my Grandpa Shiraishi and gosh, learned something about him right off the bat. But I noticed that the record that's actually connected to his name is the record for someone who was assigned the number adjacent to his, which is 3555, but his number is 3556. And I'm just wondering if there's any way, because of course my curiosity is piqued, of actually finding that record for him.
Yeah, absolutely. We will make note of that. I think Joey's typing away there, but if you can send us in the chat the correct spelling of the name, then we can look it up. We did notice before when we were beta testing the site that there were a few batching errors in the case files, and so some of them just skipped one over. Of course, we're working with thousands and thousands of case files, so we did try to sample as many as we could to make sure that they were all matching up. But if there's any errors, we can always investigate that, respond quickly, get the right information up, and help guide you to finding the case files. And I do want to say with the case files, you may not find your family members listed at all in this database. And so for those who were younger than the age of 16 during the Second World War, you will not see a case file for them. It was for anyone over the age 16 or over. So if you turned 16 during the war and celebrated your birthday, that also meant you had to go and get your registration card, and a file would have been made. You would have been assigned a number. So, it's really quite heart-wrenching to think about it in those terms. But just so you know, you may not always see everything. We also know that some of the case files might be missing out of all the thousands that we have. We're still going through making sure we got all of the batches from Library and Archives Canada, and that we've worked hard to add them all in. But there, will always be instances where it's not going to be an easy search to do your family history. So this is our attempt at making it a little bit easier, but it will require a bit of investigation. So a great resource that I would encourage folks to look at is the other archival files tab, where there we go, where you can take a look and see the other repositories, all the other archives that are research assistants and academics have gone out to do research in. And I would say that, they might have a plethora more of information that would be relevant to your family research. And if you're a student, certainly engage with those archives and ask about what else they have, because chances are they have much more, just like us at the Nikkei National Museum. So recognizing that we're a few minutes over time here, I just want to, if there's any last minute questions.
Lisa, there's just a note from Jan Nobuto at the JCCC, and since we you work so closely with them, I'm sure you're happy to acknowledge them as a repository as well. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. So that's a great point. Thank you, Jan. So the Nikkei National Museum has a shared database where we host the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto. They also take in, they're active in taking in donations as well. So you're welcome to reach out to either of us. If you're in another part of the world or this country, then and you're thinking of having a donation go into a more local area, perhaps here at the Nikkei National Museum, we're not as accessible. If you wanted to come in person and visit them often, get in touch. I have lots, between the two of us, we have lots of connections with all the other archives that also have Japanese Canadian related material, and would be happy to help you in any way we can with that process. And if you're interested in keeping them in your family for a little while, feel free to reach out to the JCCC and the Nikkei National Museum. We can help give some guidance on how to properly store, perhaps digitize, so you can share them with your family. So anything goes, send us a question. We'd be happy to help. There we go. So
Lisa,
lots of chats here.
Yeah, I was just answering a chat question, Lisa, but I wonder, so I didn't hear whether you just mentioned that people may encounter quality or legibility issues in the PDFs, and that we can also offer some support in that respect.
Yeah, absolutely. It, these records were originally copied on microfilm or microfiche, so more of a plastic kind of real substance. And the originals, in most cases, were destroyed. So the quality of the digital scans come from those plastic film reels, and quality is an issue. They weren't always perfectly copied, since most were copied in the 50s or pre 70s. So definitely reach out to the office and get in touch, and we can help lighten the images or perhaps crisp out the text, just to make it a little bit more legible. I know with my own family records, it was extremely difficult to see, even though it was typed. Just the contrast was so harsh. So if you're having a hard time and you don't have the ability to edit it yourself, send us a note and let us know. That's great. So I'll let the others scroll through the chat just to check for any other questions there. But I do want to acknowledge, the slide that Michael put up. Thank you. So we have a community drop-in Zoom session scheduled last Wednesday of each month from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. noon Pacific time. Everyone is welcome. So if you want to just come and listen, if you're a student trying to do research and you want to hear a little bit more, if you've gotten your case file, you don't understand it, you want to ask questions, drop in. The team will be able to help in any way that we can. And it'd be a great opportunity to share stories, to talk about it, feel all those emotions that we're feeling together. So this is the Zoom link. Perhaps they can also drop it into the chat. Subscribe to the LOI newsletter. This will also go out on the LOI newsletter. And the first session is scheduled for April 28th on the Wednesday. So we do have a second panel discussion for launching our archive database, and that will be this coming Wednesday, March 31st at 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Pacific time. So if you know anyone who couldn't make today's session, or if you want to encourage your family members to attend, please send them the information that our next session will be Wednesday, March 31st. So coming up, and our presenters will be myself. I'll share a little bit about the family history records that I discovered. Sherry Kajiwara, who's our director curator at the Nikkei National Museum and has a very interesting family history of what she discovered in the case files. Kelly Fleck, who's the editor of the Nikkei Voice based in Toronto, and Stephanie Kawamoto, who's a teacher. So those will be our presenters coming up for this Wednesday. Great. Any other questions there that I didn't see coming in? Jordan or Mike, if you want to let me know. Thank you. I see lots of thank yous. We're so excited to see this come to fruition and make these resources available. It's an incredible journey to go through and do this family research. So I encourage you to learn, to share, to explore this database and all the other archives that we've linked to as well in the repository. And of course, huge thank you to everyone who made this happen. We couldn't have done it without all of the past research clusters who've been working on this project for the past 7 years. And of course, Jordan for having put together this whole project in the first place after doing research with Linda Reed at the Nikkei National Museum. And just really looking forward to our next session on Wednesday and the monthly sessions to come after that. Thank you so much, everyone.